Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last time California had a severe multi-year drought, something very different happened. Democrats and Republicans, people from the northern part of the state, the southern part, inland, came together around a historic bipartisan set of water reforms. I was fortunate to help author some of that and to chair the Water Committee in the state legislature. And national newspapers like the New York Times called it the most important thing California had done for water in 60 years. This bill repeals it. Full stop. Full stop. To offer this as a solution would be laughable if it weren't such a serious offense to real solutions in California water. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which my friend referenced, is over if this bill passes, because the premise of that plan are co-equal goals for the environment and water supply reliability, and when you preempt that and repeal it, there's no basis for that plan to move forward at all. You'd better include, in fact, some funding for the federal courts if this bill passes, because instead of a solution, you're going to be unleashing a wave of litigation unlike anything the state of California has ever seen. It's going to hurt the San Joaquin Valley, and it's going to hurt every other part of the state that needs constructive solutions, not a new water war. We have over 100 years, Mr. Chairman, of deference by the federal government to the state of California and to all other western states in administering our water rights system. That was made very clear by Chief Justice Rehnquist in California versus the United States in the 1970s. The principle of state administration of water rights under the public trust doctrine is part of the California Constitution, and the California Supreme Court has made it clear that that's a bedrock of California water law. The California legislature in that historic 2009 package called that the fundamental principle of California water, and it is repealed by this vastly overreaching expansion of federal authority that was offered cynically today as a solution. I know some people across the aisle like to talk about the 10th Amendment. They like to rail against expansion of federal authority and federal overreach. Well, we're living in a very glass house here today, Mr. Chairman, because this is the most overreaching expansion of federal authority that I could ever imagine on something as basic as water rights in the western United States. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, we have heard a lot about a 3-inch fish in this debate, and in fact, to hear my colleagues in the Republican Party tell it this is a story about a 3-inch fish that is taking water away in this critical drought that should be allocated to people. Well, the truth is, Mr. Speaker, you'd have to have the brain of a 3-inch fish to believe that narrative. There is no such thing happening in this critical drought year. What is happening, however, is some people are cynically trying to capitalize on the worst drought in California history in order to steal water from some parts of the state and from other water users and give it to a few. In fact, if this bill were accurately named, it would be called the Massive Federal Preemption, Overreach, and Water Theft Act for the elections of 2014. But it is, in fact, pretending to be something quite different. We need to ask ourselves why the state of California is so passionately opposing this bill. Attorney General Kamala Harris wrote a letter just yesterday following the same position that prior attorney generals have always taken on this issue, including Republican attorney generals, that the federal government should abide by the 100-year precedent of deference, of cooperative federalism, letting California administer its own water rights and allocate that water instead of the sweeping preemption that we see in this bill. This bill would upset the most basic tenets of California water law. The fact that the California Constitution provides the state the ability to allocate water, the ability to administer things like the public trust doctrine, all of that is repealed and swept away by the preemption provisions in this bill. And it doesn't have to be that way. In a crisis like this, it actually is possible for Republicans and Democrats, from people from all parts of the state, to come together and solve problems. I know that because I was part of something just like that happened in our last multi-year critical drought. I chaired the Water Committee in the State Assembly in 2009 when there was a historic water package passed, a package that was supported by Republicans and Democrats, signed by a Republican governor, supported by people from inland, Central Valley, California, Southern California, urban areas. National media like the New York Times called it the most significant water reform in California in 60 years. Well, unfortunately, all of that, too, is repealed, just swept away by the overreaching preemption in this bill. The amendment I'm offering, Mr. Speaker, would say, at least, let's save what the national media and just about everybody else in the water world have called the most important thing, the best thing to happen in California water in the last 60 years. Let's save that from preemption as this bill goes forward. The amendment is made in order, and I would request that my colleagues vote yes on it. Thanks, Mr. Speaker. The public trust doctrine and the co-equal goals articulated in that 2009 California legislation are the centerpieces of California water. Without those co-equal goals codified in that state law, the entire Bay Delta Conservation Plan is over. It's done. It has zero chance of success. Without the public trust doctrine and other state laws, in critical years where a fully allocated and appropriated system like we have in California, where tough balancing decisions have to be made by the State Water Board, without those basic tools for how to do that job, they can't do their job. They can't allocate a diminishing resource. And the entire system of water and water rights allocation is thrown into chaos. So to hear my friend talk about his concern for litigation, I have to say this is the recipe for endless litigation and confusion and uncertainty in California. This is essentially throwing a grenade into California water that would ignite a water war unlike anything we've ever seen. I would reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman reserves. Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, we're ready to close when the gentleman from California is.
Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock reserves. Gentleman from California, Mr. Huffman.
With that, Mr. Speaker, I would simply request a yes vote. It doesn't have to be partisanship. It doesn't have to be taking water from one part of the state or from one set of users, giving it to the other, scapegoating 3-inch fish. There's actually a way to solve water problems, even in California, where water is scarce. We did it in 2009. It was widely recognized as historic, important, and positive. Let's save those 2009 water reforms from being roadkill from this reckless piece of legislation and vote yes on this amendment. I thank my colleagues for offering this motion to improve a deeply flawed bill. California is home to over 100 federally recognized tribes, including over 24 in my congressional district. Many tribes, including the Hupa, the Yurok, and the Karuk in my district, depend on wild salmon as both a vital source of economic opportunity and a respected way of life. And
gentleman will suspend.
Corey?
Gentleman will state his parliamentary.
Mr. Speaker, while House rules...
Gentleman will suspend. Does the gentleman from California yield for a parliamentary inquiry?
yes.
Will it take my time?
It will.
I'm afraid I cannot yield. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman does not yield. The House will be in order. Chair would ask all members to please cease their conversations. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Chair, some of the water impacted by this bill is critically needed by tribes in my district. This bill explicitly waives state and federal law in a way that almost certainly would lead to additional diversions from the Trinity River, which would undermine tribal fishing and water rights. The Yurok tribe in my district has written about provisions in this bill that they would undermine the federal government's ability to meet its federal trust obligation to protect, preserve, and enhance the trust resources of that tribe. This House has an obligation to clarify that this cynical bill would not diminish any protected tribal water and fishing rights, and so I urge a yes on this motion to recommit, and I thank the gentleman.